Chained alien dragon and her hatchling abandoned. Human mechanic didn't see this coming. Marcus Rodriguez wiped the grease from his hands with an old rag, squinting at the alien transport vessel that had crash-landed in the scrapyard behind his workshop. The thing looked like someone had taken a whale and crossed it with a military gunship, all sleek curves and battle scars. Steam hissed from damaged cooling vents, and the hull bore the distinctive markings of the Kethvar Empire, a civilization known throughout the galaxy for their brutal efficiency and complete disregard for other species. The crash had happened 3 days ago, lighting up the night sky over New Haven Colony like a dying star. Marcus had expected salvage crews or military investigators to show up by now, but the remote mining colony was apparently too insignificant for anyone to bother with. That suited him fine. As the only mechanic within 100 kilometers who could work on both human and alien tech, he'd seen enough crashed ships to know that this one was worth a fortune in rare components. Walking around the vessel's perimeter, Marcus noted the extensive damage. Whatever had brought this ship down hadn't been gentle. Plasma burns scarred the hull, and one of the main engines was completely missing. But what caught his attention wasn't the damage. It was the complete silence. No distress beacons, no emergency signals, nothing. Either everyone aboard was dead, or the ship had been deliberately abandoned. Marcus had been working salvage for 15 years, ever since the mining accident that cost him his left arm and ended his career in the deep tunnels. The prosthetic he'd built himself worked better than the original, incorporating alien servo motors and human neural interfaces. It gave him an edge when working with the hybrid technologies that were becoming common on frontier worlds. He approached the main airlock, noting that it had been blown from the inside. Someone had been very eager to get out. His boots crunched on scattered debris as he climbed through the twisted metal. Inside, the ship was a maze of corridors designed for beings much larger than humans. Emergency lighting cast everything in a sickly red glow, and the air recyclers wheezed with the effort of maintaining atmosphere. The first bodies he found were Kethvar soldiers, their reptilian faces frozen in expressions of shock and pain. These weren't battle deaths. Something had killed them from inside their own ship. Marcus had heard stories about Kethvar discipline, how their military never retreated and never surrendered. Whatever had happened here had been bad enough to break that legendary resolve. Following a trail of damaged bulkheads and scorch marks, Marcus descended deeper into the ship. The destruction grew worse as he went, as if something incredibly powerful had torn its way through deck after deck. He found more bodies, but also something else. Blast marks that didn't match any weapon he recognized. They were too organic, too random. Almost like claw marks if claws could channel plasma energy. The trail led to what appeared to be a cargo hold, though the massive blast doors had been ripped apart like tissue paper. Beyond them lay a chamber that made Marcus stop in his tracks. Heavy chains hung from the ceiling, each link thick as his torso and made from some kind of energy-resistant alloy. The floor was scarred with more of those strange claw marks, and the walls showed signs of tremendous heat damage. This had been a prison. Marcus was examining the broken chains when he heard it, a low, rumbling sound that seemed to come from the ship's bones. It wasn't mechanical, it was organic, alive. The sound came again, and this time he recognized it for what it was. Breathing. Something was still alive on this ship. Following the sound, Marcus found a maintenance shaft that led to the ship's lower levels. The breathing grew louder as he descended, accompanied by something else, a smaller, higher sound, like whimpering. The shaft opened into a storage compartment that reeked of ozone and charred metal. In the far corner, partially hidden behind fallen debris, something moved. Marcus approached slowly, his prosthetic arm whirring softly as its sensors tried to make sense of what he was seeing. It was a dragon. Not the mythical creatures from Earth legends, but something far more magnificent and alien. The being was easily 4 meters long, with scales that shifted color like oil on water. Its wings were folded against its body, but Marcus could see they would span twice its length when extended. Most striking were its eyes, deep violet orbs that held an intelligence that was unmistakably sentient. The dragon was injured, that much was obvious. Burns covered its flanks, and one wing hung at an awkward angle. But it was alive, and it was protecting something. Curled beneath its massive head was a smaller version of itself, no bigger than a house cat, a hatchling. The adult dragon fixed Marcus with those intelligent eyes, and he felt something touch his mind. Not words, but images and emotions. Fear, pain, desperation, and underneath it all, a fierce protective instinct that reminded him of every mother he'd ever known. Marcus raised his hands slowly, trying to project calm. "Easy there, big girl. I'm not going to hurt you." The dragon's mental touch became stronger, more focused. Suddenly, Marcus was seeing flashes of memory. The Cathvar soldiers forcing the dragon into chains, separating her from her eggs, using some kind of neural inhibitor to keep her docile. He saw her breaking free when the ship was attacked, her desperate fight to reach her offspring, finding only one hatchling still alive among the wreckage of a dozen eggs. The images stopped abruptly, leaving Marcus shaken. The dragon had shared her story with him, and now she waited to see what he would do with that knowledge. Marcus looked at the wounded mother and her terrified child, then at the wreckage around them. The Cathvar had been slavers, capturing sentient beings for some unknown purpose. The dragon had been their prisoner, and her baby was all that remained of her clutch. "Well," Marcus said quietly, "I guess I'm about to become a xenobiologist." The dragon's head tilted slightly, and Marcus felt a flicker of something that might have been hope. He began mentally cataloging what he would need: medical supplies, food suitable for alien physiology, a secure place for them to recover. His workshop had hidden chambers he'd built during the war, places where resistance fighters had once hidden from occupation forces. They would serve just as well for protecting refugees. As he started planning, Marcus noticed the hatchling watching him with eyes identical to its mother's. The little dragon made a sound somewhere between a chirp and a growl, and its mother responded with a gentle rumble, the universal language of family, recognizable across species barriers. Marcus stood up, decision made. "Come on, then. Let's get you both somewhere safe." The mother dragon struggled to her feet, favoring her injured wing. She was weak from her wounds and whatever the Cathvar had done to her, but she managed to stand. The hatchling scrambled onto her back, clinging to the base of her neck. Leading them through the ship's corridors, Marcus found himself thinking about the implications of what he was doing. Harboring escaped Cathvar prisoners would make him an enemy of one of the galaxy's most ruthless empires. But looking back at the dragon mother carefully carrying her child through the wreckage of their prison, he found he didn't care. Some things were more important than politics. The dragons followed him out of the ship and across the scrapyard to his workshop. The building was larger than it appeared from outside, built into a hillside with multiple hidden levels. Marcus led them to one of the lower chambers, a space originally designed as a bomb shelter, but converted over the years into a workshop for his more sensitive projects. "This should work," he said, activating the chamber's life support systems. "Climate control, air filtration, even a small medical bay. Not exactly dragon-sized, but we'll make it work." The mother dragon settled carefully onto the floor, keeping her injured wing extended. The hatchling climbed down and began exploring its new surroundings with the fearless curiosity of youth. It approached Marcus without hesitation, sniffing at his prosthetic arm with obvious interest. "You like the arm?" Marcus asked, flexing the mechanical fingers. "Built it myself after a mining accident. Alien servo motors, human neural interfaces, best of both worlds." The hatchling chirped and reached out with one tiny claw, gently touching the prosthetic. Its mother watched the interaction closely, but didn't intervene. If anything, she seemed pleased by her child's boldness. Marcus spent the next few hours setting up basic amenities for his unexpected guests. He rigged a heating system from spare parts, knowing that most reptilian species needed external heat sources. A water recycling unit provided clean drinking water, and his food fabricator could probably be modified to produce something edible for dragon physiology. As he worked, Marcus found himself thinking about what came next. The dragons couldn't stay hidden forever, and the Kethvar would eventually come looking for their escaped prisoners. But for now, they were safe, and that would have to be enough. The mother dragon had been watching him work, and as he finished the heating system, she approached him slowly. Up close, she was even more impressive, and more obviously intelligent. Her violet eyes held depths that spoke of a complex inner life, of thoughts and emotions as rich as any human's. She lowered her great head until it was level with his, and once again, Marcus felt that gentle mental touch. This time, instead of memories, she shared something else: gratitude. Pure, overwhelming gratitude that brought tears to his eyes. "You're welcome," he said softly. "Both of you." The hatchling had found Marcus's toolbox and was industriously examining each item with the methodical precision of a born engineer. It held up a sonic wrench in its tiny claws, chirping questioningly. "That's a sonic wrench," Marcus explained. "Adjusts the molecular bonds in metal. Very useful for delicate work." The hatchling seemed to approve, carefully placing the tool back where it belonged before moving on to the next item. Its mother made that gentle rumbling sound again, and Marcus got the impression she was amused by her child's behavior. As the day wore on, Marcus realized he was facing challenges he'd never anticipated. Caring for 2 alien refugees was complicated enough, but these weren't just any aliens. The mother dragon was clearly a powerful being, capable of channeling energy in ways that defied human understanding. The hatchling showed signs of inheriting those same abilities, plus an intelligence that was developing at an alarming rate. But looking at them now, the mother carefully grooming her child while keeping one eye on Marcus's work, the hatchling contentedly playing with a piece of scrap metal, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: purpose. For the first time since the mining accident, Marcus Rodriguez felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers. The Kethvar might return, or worse, other factions might learn about his hidden guests. But tonight, in the warm safety of his workshop, a dragon mother was teaching her child that not all aliens were enemies, and a lonely human mechanic was discovering that family came in forms he'd never imagined. The galaxy was about to learn that Marcus Rodriguez didn't just fix machines, he fixed broken lives too. And he was very good at his job. 2 weeks had passed since Marcus brought the dragons to his workshop, and the changes were remarkable. The mother dragon, whom the hatchling had somehow communicated was named Vexhara, was healing faster than any human physician would have believed possible. Her wing had straightened, the burns on her scales were fading to silver scars, and the haunted look in her violet eyes was gradually being replaced by something Marcus hadn't expected: hope. The hatchling, who seemed to respond to the name Kordek, was growing at an incredible rate. Already twice the size it had been when Marcus found them, it displayed an insatiable curiosity about everything in the workshop. More importantly, it had begun to communicate directly with Marcus through the same mental link its mother used, though its thoughts came in simpler images and emotions. Marcus had spent those 2 weeks learning more about alien biology than most xenologists learned in a lifetime. Dragons, he discovered, were silicon-based life forms with an incredible ability to process and store energy. They could eat almost anything organic, breaking it down at the molecular level for nutrition. They required significant amounts of metal in their diet, something about maintaining the conductive pathways in their scales that allowed them to channel energy. What impressed Marcus most was their intelligence. Vexahara possessed knowledge of technologies that surpassed human understanding by centuries. She could look at his equipment and instantly grasp not just how it worked, but how it could be improved. Kordek, despite being essentially a child, had already figured out how to operate several of Marcus's simpler tools. The morning that changed everything started like any other. Marcus was in his main workshop, fabricating a new heat exchanger for the Dragon's chamber when his proximity sensors detected an incoming ship. A big one, moving fast and broadcasting Kethvar identification codes. Vex, he called, using the shortened version of her name she seemed to prefer. "We've got company." The response was immediate. Both dragons appeared at the chamber entrance, Vex moving with predatory grace despite her healing injuries, Kordek clinging to her neck with wide, frightened eyes. Marcus felt their shared emotional state, fear mixed with grim determination. Through the mental link, Vex shared an image. The ship above was a Kethvar hunter-killer, specifically designed for tracking escaped prisoners. It would be equipped with bioscanners capable of detecting dragon physiology from orbit. "Can they find you down here?" Marcus asked. Vexahara's response was a mental image of the ship's scanning equipment burning through layers of rock and metal. The workshop's shielding wouldn't hide them for long. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. After 2 weeks of watching Vex recover and Kordek grow, after seeing the gentle intelligence behind their alien features, the thought of turning them over to their former captors made his blood boil. But fighting a Kethvar warship with nothing but salvaged equipment seemed suicidal. Then he looked at Kordek, saw the trust in those young violet eyes, and made his decision. "Okay," he said calmly. "If they want you back, they're going to have to go through me." Vexahara stared at him for a long moment, and Marcus felt her probe his mind, searching for doubt or deception. What she found there made her raise her great head in what he'd learned was a gesture of respect among her people. "Right," Marcus continued, his mind already racing through possibilities. "Vex, I need to know what you're capable of. Combat-wise, I mean." The answer came as a flood of images. Plasma breath that could melt through starship armor, energy manipulation that could overload electrical systems, physical strength that could tear through bulkheads. But underneath the impressive display, Marcus sensed something else. Exhaustion. The neural inhibitors the Kethvar had used were still affecting her, and she was nowhere near full strength. "What about Kordek?" The response was protective alarm. Kordek was too young, too untrained. His abilities were unpredictable and could be dangerous to everyone around him. Marcus nodded grimly. "So it's just us, then." The Kethvar ship settled into a hover pattern directly above the workshop. Through his sensors, Marcus could see it was huge, easily 10 times the size of the crashed transport. Gun ports along its hull spoke of serious firepower, and he counted at least a dozen smaller craft detaching from its belly. Assault shuttles, probably carrying a full company of Kethvar soldiers. "They're not taking any chances," Marcus muttered. He led the dragons deeper into the workshop complex, to a chamber he'd never shown anyone. It contained the real reason he'd chosen this particular location for his business. A cache of military equipment left over from the war, hidden away and forgotten by both sides. Power armor, military-grade weapons, shield generators, even a couple of automated defense turrets. Marcus had been saving it all for a rainy day. Today, it was pouring. Marcus suited up in the power armor, its systems coming online with a familiar hum. The suit was human-designed, but incorporated alien technology he'd reverse-engineered over the years. Enhanced strength, improved reaction time, and weapon systems that could punch through most known armor types. "Vex, I need you to stay with Kordek," he said, checking his weapons. "If something happens to me, there's an escape tunnel behind the fusion generator. It leads to the old mine shafts. You can lose any pursuit in there." Vexhara's response was immediate and negative. She wasn't abandoning him to face her enemies alone. "This isn't about honor," Marcus said firmly. "It's about keeping your son safe. If we both get captured or killed, what happens to him?" The logic was unassailable, but Marcus could feel Vex's frustration and guilt. She wanted to fight, to protect the human who had shown her kindness when she expected none. The first explosion rocked the workshop as Kethvar soldiers blasted through the main entrance. Marcus had expected subtlety, a demand for surrender, some attempt at negotiation. Instead, they came in shooting, apparently having decided that any human harboring their escaped prisoners was an enemy combatant. That suited Marcus just fine. He'd gotten tired of subtle a long time ago. The first squad of soldiers made it halfway across the main workshop floor before Marcus opened fire from concealment. His plasma rifle, modified with Dragon Tech power regulators, punched through their armor like paper. The survivors took cover behind his workbenches, shouting orders in their harsh, guttural language. Marcus felt a moment of satisfaction. The Kethvar were used to their prisoners being helpless, their enemies being afraid. They weren't prepared for someone who fought back with equal ferocity. But satisfaction turned to concern as more soldiers poured through the breach. These weren't the regular troops from the first squad. They were bigger, more heavily armored, and they moved with the coordinated precision of elite forces. Worse, they were carrying weapons Marcus recognized. Neural disruptors designed specifically for subduing dragon physiology. One of them spotted his position and fired. The neural disruptor beam missed Marcus, but struck his plasma rifle, overloading its power cell. The weapon exploded in his hands, sending him tumbling backward as his armor's shields absorbed the blast. Marcus rolled behind a support pillar as more beams converged on his position. His backup weapons were on the other side of the workshop, and the soldiers were advancing in a textbook flanking maneuver. In a few seconds, they'd have him surrounded. That was when Vexahara decided she'd had enough of staying hidden. The temperature in the workshop spiked as she emerged from the hidden chamber, her scales glowing with stored energy. The lead soldier turned toward her, neural disruptor tracking, but never got the chance to fire. Vex's plasma breath caught him center mass, turning his armor into molten slag in seconds. The other soldiers scattered, trying to find cover from the dragon's fury, but Vex was beyond cover now. She was a force of nature, channeling energy in ways that made their technology look primitive. Lightning arced from her claws, overloading their weapons and armor systems. Her tail lashed out, sending one soldier flying into a wall with enough force to leave a crater. Marcus used the distraction to reach his weapon cache, arming himself with everything he could carry. Military-grade explosives, armor-piercing ammunition, even an old plasma cannon that had probably violated 17 different weapons treaties. He emerged from cover like an avenging angel, adding his firepower to Vex's assault. The workshop became a battlefield, filled with the sound of energy weapons and roaring dragons. The Kethvar soldiers, caught between human cunning and dragon fury, found themselves outmatched for perhaps the first time in their military careers. They'd come expecting to collect helpless prisoners and found instead a war. But Marcus knew they couldn't win this fight. More soldiers were coming. He could hear their shuttles landing outside, and eventually, sheer numbers would tell. Worse, he was worried about Kordek. The young dragon was still hidden in the chamber, but the energy discharges from the battle might be affecting him. Dragon hatchlings were sensitive to electrical fields, and too much exposure could cause permanent damage. As if reading his thoughts, Vex suddenly broke off her attack and looked toward the hidden chamber. Marcus felt her alarm through their mental link. Kordek was in distress. "Go!" he shouted over the sound of weapons fire. "I'll hold them here." But Vexhara had a better idea. Instead of retreating, she moved toward Marcus, her mental voice urgent in his mind. She was sharing something, technical specifications, energy flow patterns, equations that made his modified brain ache to process. She was showing him how to link their abilities. Marcus stared at her, not understanding at first. Then the implications hit him like a plasma bolt to the chest. Dragon energy manipulation wasn't just biological. It was partially technological, based on quantum field interactions that human science was only beginning to understand. With the right interface, with the proper neural link. "You want to hotwire me to your nervous system?" he asked incredulously. Vexhara's response was tinged with desperate humor. It wouldn't be permanent, and it would probably hurt, but it would give them access to abilities neither could achieve alone. Human creativity and tool use combined with dragon energy manipulation. It was completely untested, possibly dangerous, and absolutely insane. Marcus grinned behind his helmet's faceplate. "Let's do it." The process was surreal. Vexahara placed one clawed hand on his armor's neural interface port, and suddenly Marcus's consciousness expanded. He could feel the energy flows in the workshop's power grid, sense the electromagnetic signatures of the Kethvar weapons, even detect the bioelectric fields of living beings through walls and armor. But more than that, he could control it all. Marcus raised his hands, and the workshop's lights exploded in a shower of sparks as he channeled their energy into his armor's power cells. He reached out with senses he'd never possessed before and felt the Kethvar shuttles hovering outside, their engines running hot and vulnerable. What happened next would be talked about in military academies for generations. A human mechanic, linked to an alien dragon, turned the very air into a weapon. Electromagnetic pulses killed the shuttle's engines, sending them crashing to the ground. Energy discharges followed power conduits into the soldiers' armor, overloading their life support systems. The workshop itself became an extension of Marcus's will, its systems turning against the invaders. In less than 5 minutes, the battle was over. The surviving Kethvar soldiers fled back to their ship, which immediately began pulling back to a safe distance. They'd come expecting an easy retrieval operation and found instead a nightmare that challenged everything they thought they knew about human capabilities. As the energy link faded, Marcus collapsed to his knees, his body shaking from the after effects. Linking with Vexahara had been like trying to channel a lightning storm through a garden hose. Human physiology simply wasn't designed for that kind of power, but it had worked. They were alive. Kordek was safe, and the Kethvar had been reminded that humans were far more dangerous than they appeared. Vexhara helped Marcus to his feet, her mental voice filled with something between amazement and concern. The link had affected her too, showing her human determination and ingenuity from the inside. She'd gained a new understanding of what drove her unlikely ally. "Is it over?" Marcus asked, though he already suspected the answer. Vexhara's response came with images of the Kethvar ship in orbit, its weapons powering up. No, it wasn't over. This had been just the first round. The real fight was about to begin. Marcus looked around his ruined workshop, then at the dragon who had become his partner in defiance. They'd won this battle, but the war was just starting. The Kethvar wouldn't underestimate them again, and next time, they'd come with enough firepower to level the entire colony. But as he felt Kordek's relief and gratitude through the mental link, Marcus found he didn't care about the odds. Some things were worth fighting for, no matter the cost. And if the Kethvar wanted his family, because that's what they'd become, he realized, they were going to have to earn them. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when you threatened a human's family. It wasn't going to be pretty. The Kethvar orbital bombardment began at dawn, turning the landscape around Marcus's workshop into a hellscape of molten rock and twisted metal. But the weapons fire wasn't random. It was surgical, designed to destroy everything except the workshop itself. They wanted their escaped prisoners alive, which gave Marcus the only advantage he was likely to get. 3 days had passed since the failed ground assault. The Kethvar ship hung in orbit like a mechanical moon, its massive bulk blotting out stars. Marcus had spent those days preparing for what he knew would be their final confrontation. There would be no more half measures, no more testing attacks. When the Kethvar came again, they would come with everything they had. Marcus stood in his workshop's command center, surrounded by displays showing sensor readings and tactical information. The modifications he'd made over the past 72 hours would have been impossible without Vex Hera's help. Together, they'd turned his simple repair facility into something between a fortress and a weapons laboratory. Kordek had grown again, now the size of a large dog and displaying abilities that amazed even his mother. The young dragon had learned to interface directly with Marcus's computer systems, his developing neural pathways somehow compatible with human technology. More importantly, he'd begun to understand the true scope of what was happening around him. Through their shared mental link, Marcus felt the hatchling's growing anger. Kordek might be young, but he understood that the beings in the ship above had killed his siblings, enslaved his mother, and now threatened the human who had saved them both. Dragon emotion, Marcus was learning, burned hot and pure, untempered by the doubts that plagued more complex minds. "They're moving," Vex Hera announced, her mental voice tense with anticipation. Marcus checked his sensors and confirmed what she'd detected. The Kethvar ship was descending, moving into the atmosphere with the ponderous grace of a mountain learning to fly. This time, they weren't sending shuttles or soldiers. This time, they were bringing the ship itself. The vessel was over 3 kilometers long, bristling with weapons that could crack planets. Its hull bore the scars of 100 battles, and its crew numbered in the thousands. It was, in every measurable way, completely unstoppable by anything a single human and 2 dragons could muster. Marcus grinned. He'd never been good at accepting the odds. "Vex, are you sure about the neural link?" he asked. "Last time nearly killed me." Her response came tinged with dry amusement. The last time had been improvised, desperate. This time, they'd prepared. The interface chamber they'd built contained systems designed specifically to handle the interaction between human and dragon nervous systems. It would still be dangerous, but the risks were manageable. Marcus entered the chamber and settled into the pilot's chair he'd modified with dragon biotechnology. Organic neural interfaces grew from the chair like living metal, designed to connect with both his prosthetic arm and his natural nervous system. Vex Hera took her position on the platform beside him, her claws interfacing with crystalline control nodes that pulsed with stored energy. Kordek climbed onto his mother's back, his small claws finding purchase among her scales. The young dragon would serve as a living amplifier, his developing abilities boosting the connection between the 2 adults. As the neural link established itself, Marcus felt his consciousness expand again. But this time the sensation was controlled, manageable. He could sense the Kethvar ship's approach, feel the hostile intent of its crew, even detect the specific types of weapons they were charging for use against his workshop. But more than that, he could feel the workshop itself. Every system, every circuit, every jury-rigged modification he'd made over 15 years. And with Vex Hera's power flowing through the link, he could make it all dance to his will. The Kethvar ship settled into position a kilometer above the workshop, its massive shadow blocking out the sun. Weapon ports opened along its hull like mechanical flowers, each one capable of reducing the facility below to component atoms. Marcus felt their targeting systems lock onto his location and smiled. Time to show them what human ingenuity could accomplish when properly motivated. The first surprise was the shield. Not a traditional energy barrier, but something far more elegant, a localized distortion field that bent space itself around the workshop. Kethvar energy weapons fired at empty air while their target sat safely in a pocket of twisted reality. The second surprise was the workshop's response. Every piece of salvaged technology Marcus had accumulated over the years came online at once, linked together by Dragon-enhanced control systems into a single massive weapon. Plasma conduits from scrapped starships, gravitational manipulators from derelict cargo haulers, even the quantum resonators from a crashed science vessel, all of it working in harmony to achieve something that violated several laws of physics. The beam that lanced upward from the workshop was invisible to the naked eye, but its effects were immediate and catastrophic. It struck the Kethvar ship's main reactor, not with explosive force, but with something far worse: selective atomic decay. The exotic matter that powered their faster-than-light drive began to break down at the quantum level, turning into ordinary hydrogen with a release of energy that lit up every sensor for light years around. The massive ship shuddered as its power systems failed in cascade. Emergency lighting flickered on across its hull as life support systems switched to backup power. For the first time in their military history, a Kethvar warship found itself at the mercy of what they had considered a primitive species. Marcus felt the crew's panic through the neural link, their shock and disbelief as their supposedly invincible vessel lost power. But he also felt something else: the presence of the ship's commander, a mind like ice and steel that refused to accept defeat. The Kethvar captain's response was swift and ruthless. If he couldn't capture the escaped prisoners, he would ensure they could never escape again. The ship's kinetic bombardment systems came online, powered by backup reactors. Solid projectiles began raining down on the workshop's position, each one carrying the force of a nuclear weapon. The shield held for the first few impacts, but Marcus could feel it weakening. The distortion field required enormous amounts of energy to maintain, and even with Vexahara's power supplementing the workshop's systems, they couldn't sustain this kind of punishment indefinitely. That was when Kordek made his decision. The young dragon's mind touched Marcus's through the link, sharing images and emotions with startling clarity. He understood the danger they were in, understood that the current plan wasn't enough to save them, but he also understood something else: his own potential. Before either adult could stop him, Kordek launched himself from his mother's back and landed on the main control console. His claws interfaced directly with the quantum processing cores, and suddenly the neural link exploded with new possibilities. Marcus felt his consciousness expand beyond anything he'd experienced before. Through Kordek's untrained but incredibly powerful abilities, he could sense not just the immediate area, but the entire star system. Every ship, every station, every piece of technology within a dozen light minutes was suddenly as familiar to him as his own prosthetic arm. But with that awareness came danger. Kordek was channeling more energy than his young body could handle. His scales were beginning to glow with dangerous intensity, and Marcus could feel the hatchling's life force burning like a candle in a hurricane. Vexahara's alarm flooded through the link, her maternal instincts screaming at the threat to her child. But even as she tried to break the connection, Marcus realized what Kordek was offering: not just his power, but his sacrifice. The young dragon was willing to burn himself out to save the family that had saved him. Marcus made his choice. Instead of accepting the hatchling's sacrifice, he reached out through the link and began drawing the excess energy into himself. His human nervous system was never designed for this kind of load, but his prosthetic arm contained systems that could handle the overflow. Alien technology met human engineering in a synthesis that should have been impossible. Pain exploded through Marcus's body as he became a living capacitor, storing energy that could power a small city. But with that pain came opportunity. With Kordek's amplification and Vexahara's knowledge, Marcus reached out across the star system and began to work. The first change was subtle. A mining platform in the outer system suddenly altered course, its automated systems responding to signals that bypassed every security protocol. Then another platform, and another, until a dozen massive industrial complexes were moving toward the inner system at maximum acceleration. The Kethvar commander noticed the movement, but dismissed it as irrelevant. Mining platforms were slow, unarmed, and wouldn't reach his position for hours. He continued the bombardment, confident that the shield protecting his targets would soon fail. He was still confident when the platforms began releasing their cargo. Asteroids, hundreds of them, each one massing millions of tons, and accelerated to significant fractions of light speed. They weren't aimed at the Kethvar ship. They were aimed at empty space, carefully calculated trajectories that would bring them together at a specific point in time and space, right where the Kethvar ship would be when it tried to escape. The commander realized the trap too late. His ship's engines were still offline, its reactor crippled by Marcus's first attack. Even at full power, the massive vessel couldn't maneuver fast enough to avoid the incoming rocks. He could only watch as thousands of tons of stone and metal converged on his position with the inevitability of gravity. The impacts came like thunder. The ship's shields held against the first few asteroids, but each collision drained power they couldn't spare. Armor plating cracked under the assault. Hull breaches vented atmosphere and crew into space. Emergency klaxons wailed as damage control teams struggled to maintain basic life support. Marcus felt the commander's growing desperation through the link, his ice-cold certainty cracking under the weight of inevitable defeat. The Kethvar had ruled the galaxy through superior technology and ruthless efficiency. They had never encountered an enemy who could turn their own advantages against them. But the asteroid bombardment was just the beginning. As the Kethvar ship reeled under the kinetic assault, Marcus reached out through the quantum link to touch every technological system in the region. Communication satellites began broadcasting surrender demands in the Kethvar's own language. Traffic control systems redirected shipping to avoid the battle zone. Even civilian entertainment networks were co-opted to spread the story of humanity's first victory against the Galactic Empire. The message was simple but powerful. Humans protected their own, and the consequences of threatening that protection were severe. The Kethvar commander, his ship crippled and his crew demoralized, finally transmitted the signal Marcus had been waiting for. A formal withdrawal request, acknowledgement that his prisoners were beyond recovery. In the harsh calculus of empire, the cost of continuing the battle had exceeded the value of the objective. As the damaged ship limped away from the star system under escort from hastily assembled human defense forces, Marcus finally allowed the neural link to fade. The sudden absence of dragon consciousness left him feeling hollow, diminished, but alive. Kordek collapsed on the control console, his scales dim with exhaustion, but his vital signs stable. Vexahara gathered her child against her chest, crooning softly in a language older than human civilization. The hatchling had pushed himself to his absolute limits, but he would recover. Marcus slumped in his chair, every muscle in his body screaming in protest. The prosthetic arm that had helped him channel impossible energies was partially melted, its alien components fused beyond repair. But he was grinning, despite the pain. Despite the exhaustion, despite knowing that his actions had probably started a war between humanity and the Kethvar Empire. Some things were worth starting wars over. In the days that followed, as news of the battle spread across human space, Marcus found himself reluctantly famous. Military analysts studied recordings of the fight, trying to understand how one man and two aliens had defeated a Kethvar warship. Scientists begged for access to his workshop, hoping to reverse engineer the technology he'd jury-rigged in desperate circumstances. But Marcus ignored them all. He had more important things to do. Kordek was growing again, his rapid development apparently accelerated by his exposure to human technology. The young dragon spent his days learning to interface with increasingly complex systems, his natural abilities enhanced by the neural pathways he'd developed during the battle. He was becoming something new, neither fully dragon nor human-influenced, but a bridge between species. Vexhara had begun sharing her memories of dragon civilization, painting pictures of a society that had spanned galaxies before the Kethvar enslaved them. Scattered colonies still existed in hidden corners of space, keeping their culture alive in the hope that someday their people would be free. That someday, Marcus realized, might be closer than anyone imagined. The neural link technology he'd developed with Vexhara's help had applications far beyond combat. It could allow different species to share knowledge directly, to understand each other in ways that transcended language barriers. With proper development, it might be possible to create networks spanning entire star systems, connecting diverse minds in pursuit of common goals. Humanity was not alone in the galaxy, but neither were they helpless. They had allies now, powerful ones who remembered what it meant to be free. And they had something the Kethvar had never expected to face, the stubborn refusal of a species that simply didn't know when to quit. Marcus Rodriguez, mechanic and reluctant hero, stood in his rebuilt workshop and watched his adopted family learn to use tools designed by human hands. Kordek was attempting to repair a damaged plasma regulator while his mother guided him through the process with patient mental nudges. It was a scene of domestic tranquility that would have been impossible just months before. The galaxy was changing. Old empires were being challenged by new alliances. Traditional boundaries between species were blurring as technology allowed unprecedented cooperation. And it had all started with a human mechanic who couldn't stand the thought of a mother separated from her child. Sometimes, Marcus reflected, the most important revolutions began with the smallest acts of kindness. He'd saved 2 dragons from slavery and found himself part of something larger than he'd ever imagined. The Kethvar Empire had ruled through fear for millennia, but fear was a fragile foundation when faced with love, courage, and the unlimited potential of beings who refused to accept that the universe had already been divided among its conquerors. The future was unwritten, full of possibilities that no single species could achieve alone. And for the first time in his life, Marcus Rodriguez was excited to see what tomorrow would bring.